The lights were blinding, the crowd buzzing with excitement. It was a perfect night for a concert, and everyone in the room was riding that wave of energy, completely oblivious to what was about to unfold. I stood in the shadows, unseen, but I had the best view in the house. My eyes locked on Tom, his bass slung low as he played his opening riffs. He looked calm and in control, like a man with no worries in the world. My wife, Meg, sat in the front row, smiling up at him as if he was her personal hero. I clenched my fists at my sides, forcing myself to stay still. Tonight was supposed to be Tom's moment to shine, his big performance at the charity event I had organized. It was all part of my plan, a setup months in the making. He had no idea what was coming. When I first found out about the affair, it was like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Meg and I had been together for years, building a life, a home, hell, a future. And she threw it all away for a bassist. A bassist, of all people. The night I found those text messages, something in me broke. I remember standing in our kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. The texts were casual, almost flirty, as if betraying your husband was just another day at the office. At first, I didn't know what to do. Scream? Confront her? Pack my things and leave? But no, somewhere in the middle of the shock and rage, a thought took root. I wasn't going to be the victim in this story. I wasn't going to be the fool who walked away quietly. If they wanted to ruin my life, I'd make damn sure to ruin theirs first. That's when the idea for the charity concert came to me. Tom was always hungry for the spotlight, eager to show off his talent to anyone who'd listen. It was his Achilles heel, the way he needed admiration like air. So, I made some calls, pulled a few strings, and suddenly, Tom was set to headline a charity event for underprivileged kids. Meg loved the idea. She thought it was sweet, noble, even. She had no idea she was about to witness the destruction of her new lover. I spent months preparing, gathering evidence, every secret message, every stolen moment, every lie, captured in photographs, video clips, anything I could get my hands on. I pieced it all together, knowing that when the moment came, I'd have everything I needed to expose them. Tonight was the night. Tom was halfway through his set, oblivious to the storm brewing around him. I could see Meg out of the corner of my eye, completely mesmerized by him, clapping along with the rest of the crowd. She looked happy, maybe even proud of herself. And that only fueled my resolve. I stepped backstage and gave the tech team a nod. They were in on it, of course, paid handsomely to follow my exact instructions. The music began to fade, and the lights dimmed. There was a murmur of confusion from the audience as the screen behind Tom flickered to life. At first, it showed nothing but static. Tom glanced over his shoulder, still strumming, but the crowd was getting restless. And then, the first video played. It was grainy, shot from a distance, but unmistakable. Tom and Meg, locked in an embrace, kissing like they were the only two people in the world. The crowd gasped. Tom's fingers froze on the strings. The second video followed, more intimate, more damning. Conversations about sneaking around, their casual cruelty towards me. The husband Meg thought was too blind to notice. Laughter, flirtation, secret meetings in parking lots. Each clip is more painful than the last. Tom dropped his bass with a thud, the sound echoing through the now silent room. His face went pale, his eyes wide with panic as he turned back to the screen, then to the crowd. The mask he wore so well, that cool, confident smile, was gone. He looked like a trapped animal. Meg's reaction was even better than I had imagined. Her smile vanished in an instant, her face flushing red as she realized everyone in the room, the friends, the family, the charity patrons, were watching her dirty little secret unravel in real time. I should have felt something then, satisfaction, victory, something. But as I stood there in the shadows, watching their lives crumble on that screen, I felt nothing. No triumph, no sense of justice, just an empty pit in my stomach that kept growing. Tom stumbled off the stage, pushing through the crowd, and Meg followed, avoiding eye contact with anyone as she hurried after him. The night I had planned so meticulously, the moment I had waited for, was over in a matter of minutes. And now, all I had left was the silence. The applause had died, the room had gone still, and I was left alone with the wreckage. I had won, hadn't I? I had destroyed them, just like I wanted. But as I stared at the vacant stage, I wondered if I had only destroyed myself in the process. The morning after the concert, the house was quieter than it had ever been. Meg hadn't come home, and I wasn't surprised. I imagined she spent the night at Tom's. Both of them licking their wounds, trying to figure out how to salvage whatever was left of their lives. But I didn't care about where they were or what they did anymore. What haunted me now was the emptiness that had settled in my chest. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the routine movements of a man who was still going through the motions. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow through the kitchen window. I stared at the table where Meg and I used to sit for breakfast, talk about our plans, and pretend we were still the happy couple everyone thought we were. That table seemed like a relic now, a monument to something long dead. The notifications on my phone were endless: texts, missed calls, voicemails. Everyone had something to say about what had happened last night. Some people were shocked, others curious. A few, I imagined, were just entertained by the drama. But I had no interest in talking to anyone. I let the phone buzz on the counter and took a long sip of my coffee. I thought about what I had done, about the months I had spent crafting that perfect revenge. I had imagined it 1,000 times in my head: the way Tom's face would crumple in shock, the way Meg would squirm in humiliation, the way everyone else would see them for the liars they were. And all of that had happened, just as I'd planned. But the payoff, the satisfaction I had been chasing, never came. Instead, I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into an endless void. I didn't want to admit it, but the truth was there, staring me in the face. I wasn't any better off now than I had been before. Maybe worse, because now, on top of the betrayal, there was something else, a nagging sense that I had lost something important, something I couldn't get back. I set my mug down and stood up, pacing the kitchen. I needed to do something, anything, to get out of my head. The silence in the house was suffocating. I grabbed my jacket and my keys and walked out the door without a second thought. The streets were quiet as I drove aimlessly through the neighborhood, passing by familiar places that suddenly felt foreign. The park where Meg and I used to walk our dog. The diner where we used to grab breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings. All of it felt like it belonged to someone else's life now, like I was just a visitor passing through the ruins of a place I once called home. I wasn't sure where I was going until I found myself pulling into the parking lot of the community center. It was still early, but the place was already buzzing with activity. Volunteers setting up tables, organizing supplies, getting ready for whatever event was scheduled for the day. I had spent months planning that charity concert, but I had never given a second thought to the cause itself. It had all been about Tom, about revenge. But now, as I watched these people work, I started to wonder if maybe there was something else here for me. I got out of the car and walked inside. The director, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a warm smile, greeted me at the door. She recognized me from the night before, of course. Everyone did, but she didn't bring it up. She just smiled and asked if I was there to help. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how easily the word came out. I guess I am. She handed me a clipboard and pointed me toward a group that was setting up a food drive. I spent the next few hours hauling boxes, stacking cans, and doing whatever was needed. It wasn't glamorous work, and it certainly didn't solve my problems. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about Meg or Tom. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was just doing something useful. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. The kind that made you feel like you'd accomplished something. The kind that lets you sleep at night. As I drove home, the weight in my chest felt a little lighter. The pain was still there, the betrayal still fresh, but it didn't consume me the way it had before. Maybe it was because, for a few hours, I had stopped thinking about myself. Maybe it was because I had seen a glimpse of something bigger than my own anger, my own need for revenge. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was still dark. Meg hadn't come back, and I didn't expect her to. I sat in the car for a while, staring at the front door, wondering if I even wanted her to come back. Part of me had spent so long planning her downfall that I hadn't thought about what came next. What would I do now that she was out of my life? What kind of man did I want to be? I thought about the people I had met at the community center, the work they were doing, the lives they were trying to improve. It wasn't much, but it was something. Something real, something that mattered. Maybe that was the answer. Maybe, instead of tearing people down, I could start building something up. It wouldn't fix everything, and it wouldn't erase the hurt. But it was a place to start. And after everything, I realized that's what I needed most of all, a new beginning. The days after the concert blurred into a strange routine. Meg never came back to the house, and I didn't bother trying to track her down. We hadn't spoken since that night, and I wasn't sure we ever would. I had seen the looks on people's faces at the concert, the whispers, the pointing, the judgment. Meg's world had come crashing down in front of everyone she knew, and I figured she'd want nothing more than to disappear. Tom, from what I gathered, had gone underground as well. His band's social media pages went dark, no new gigs were announced. No photos of him smiling with his bass. I had ruined them both, just as I'd planned. But even though I had achieved my goal, the sense of triumph I had once craved never materialized. I spend my mornings at the community center now, keeping busy. It was easier that way. I'd wake up, pour a cup of coffee, and head out before I had time to sit around and wallow in the emptiness of the house. The work at the center was steady, and it distracted me from my own problems. Sorting donations, organizing drives, setting up for events, it all felt like small, manageable tasks that filled the hours of my day. It didn't take away the pain, but it dulled it, made it bearable. People at the center didn't pry into my personal life. They were kind but not nosy, and that was exactly what I needed. There was this unspoken understanding that everyone there had their own baggage, their own story, and that was okay. We weren't there to talk about our pasts, we were there to make the present a little better for someone else. One afternoon, while I was stacking boxes for a food drive, the director, Marie, came over. She had been the first person to welcome me that morning after the concert, and though we hadn't spoken much since, I could tell she kept an eye on me. "Hey, Eric," she said, her voice soft but steady. "We've got a fundraiser coming up next month. We could use some help with the planning. I thought, with your experience organizing events, you might want to be involved." At first, I hesitated. The idea of organizing another event brought back too many memories of that night. Of what I had done. But then I realized this wasn't about revenge. This was something different, something that could actually help people. "I'll do it," I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Marie smiled, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Great, I'll get you the details." As she walked away, I felt a strange sense of purpose begin to take root. This wasn't just another distraction. This was a chance to rebuild, to do something that mattered. I knew it wouldn't fix everything. But it was a step forward, and right now, that was all I could ask for. That night, for the first time in weeks, I slept without tossing and turning. It wasn't the deep, peaceful sleep I had known before the affair, but it was something. And as I lay there in the dark, I started to think that maybe, just maybe, there was life after all of this. Maybe there was a way to move on, to find something new. I wasn't there yet, but I could feel the path opening up in front of me. A few weeks passed, and things started to fall into place. The fundraiser was coming together, and I found myself getting more involved than I had expected. There were meetings with local businesses, conversations with volunteers, and a growing list of tasks that kept me busy from morning till night. It was exactly what I needed. No time to dwell on the past, no space for regret. But as the event drew closer, I started hearing rumors. People in town were still talking about the concert, about what had happened that night. It didn't surprise me. A scandal like that had a way of lingering, but I had thought I was done with it. I had moved on, or so I told myself. Then, one afternoon, I got a call from Meg. Her name flashed on the screen, and for a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. But something in me, a part of me I wasn't ready to admit still cared, answered. "Eric," she said, her voice shaky. "Can we talk?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, waiting for my response. I didn't want to talk to her. I didn't want to revisit everything that had happened. But there was a part of me that needed closure, needed to face her and ask the questions that had been gnawing at me since the night I found out. "Fine," I said, my voice colder than I intended. "When?" "Now," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm outside." I stood there, frozen, the phone still pressed to my ear. She was outside? I hadn't expected her to be so close, to invade my space like that. But part of me had known this moment was coming. It was inevitable. I hung up and walked to the front door. There she was, standing in the driveway, her face pale, her eyes red like she hadn't slept in days. She looked smaller, frailer than I remembered. The confident woman who had betrayed me with such ease seemed to have crumbled under the weight of her own guilt. We stood there for a moment, neither of us saying a word. Finally, I stepped aside and let her in. She walked into the living room like a stranger, as if she didn't recognize the place that had once been our home. "I didn't know if you'd answer," she said, her voice trembling. "I almost didn't," I replied flatly, crossing my arms. "So, what do you want?" She looked down, biting her lip like she was trying to hold back tears. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, and I know I hurt you in ways I can't even imagine. But I just couldn't leave things the way they were." I stared at her, the weight of her words hitting me harder than I expected. For months, I had dreamed of this moment, of her begging for forgiveness, of her admitting how wrong she was. But now, standing in front of her, I didn't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. I just felt tired. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said, my voice low. What you and Tom did, wasn't just some mistake. You broke something in me. Something I don't think I can fix." She flinched at my words, tears spilling over. I know, and I hate myself for it. I've lost everything, Eric. I've lost you, I've lost my friends, I've lost me. And I don't expect you to take me back. I just needed to tell you that I'm sorry." For a long time, I didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Part of me wanted to scream at her, to unleash all the anger I had bottled up. But another part of me, the part that was slowly healing, realized that this was all she could give. An apology, a moment of truth. It wouldn't fix what had been broken. But it was something. "I believe you," I finally said. "But that doesn't change what happened." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I know. I hope you can move on. I hope you can find happiness." With that, she stood up and walked to the door, pausing for a moment before she left. "Take care, Eric," she whispered. And then she was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where she had stood. It was over. Really over this time. And for the first time since it all began, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because I had forgiven her, but because I had finally let go. The past was behind me now, and the future, whatever it held, was mine to build. Life started to settle into something like normal after Meg's visit. For months, I had felt like I was trapped in a storm, every day a battle against the anger, the betrayal, and the overwhelming sense of loss. But now, with Meg's apology hanging in the air, it was as if the storm had passed. The wounds were still there, raw and deep, but the chaos had finally quieted down. The fundraiser was just a week away, and it had taken over most of my time and thoughts. The community center had become a second home to me. I wasn't just a volunteer anymore, I was one of them, part of something bigger than my personal mess. The days were filled with meetings, planning sessions, and coordinating volunteers, leaving me little room to think about anything else. One afternoon, Marie pulled me aside after a long meeting. She had that look in her eye, the one that told me she was about to bring up something serious. "You've really stepped up these past few weeks," she said, leaning against her desk, arms crossed. "We couldn't have pulled this off without you." I shrugged, feeling a little uncomfortable with the praise. "Just doing what I can." Marie nodded, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she was sizing me up. "You're doing more than that, Eric. Look, I don't know the full story of what happened to you, and I'm not asking for it. But whatever it was, you've turned a corner." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just stood there, waiting for her to continue. "You should be proud of yourself," she said, her voice softening. "Not everyone bounces back the way you have. Some people get stuck in their pain. But you've found a way to move forward." I felt a strange mix of emotions rise in my chest. Gratitude, maybe. A sense of relief. But also something like discomfort, like I wasn't sure I deserved her words. "Thanks," I muttered, not knowing what else to say. Marie smiled, but there was a seriousness behind it. "The fundraiser's going to be a big deal. It's the kind of event that can really make a difference. And I think, once it's over, you'll see what I've been seeing. That you're ready for more than just surviving. You're ready to live again." Her words stayed with me long after I left the center that day. Ready to live again. Was I really ready? Or was I just going through the motions, pretending to be okay when the truth was I was still broken inside? The night of the fundraiser came quicker than I expected. The community center was packed, the tables set with flowers and candles, the mood festive but purposeful. This wasn't just about raising money, it was about hope. For the first time, I felt like I was part of something that truly mattered. As people started arriving, I stood near the entrance, greeting guests alongside Marie. The buzz of excitement filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The event went off without a hitch. The speeches were heartfelt, the donations poured in, and everyone seemed genuinely engaged with the cause. I could see it in their faces, the desire to help, to make a difference. And as I looked around the room, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't thinking about Meg or Tom. Not once. By the time the night was over, the center had raised more money than any of us had hoped for. As the last guests trickled out, I stood in the middle of the now empty room, exhausted but strangely at peace. Marie came over, her face glowing with pride. "We did it," she said, beaming. "Yeah," I agreed, a small smile tugging at my lips. "We did." She gave me a look, the kind that told me she knew exactly what I was thinking. "You've come a long way, Eric. You should be proud of that." For once, I didn't brush off her words. I let them sink in and allowed myself to believe them. Maybe I had come a long way. Maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. The weeks after the fundraiser felt different. The sense of accomplishment from the event lingered, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I started thinking about the future, not with dread, but with cautious hope. I began to throw myself even deeper into community work, taking on more responsibilities, and organizing more events. It wasn't just a distraction anymore. It was something I cared about. Something that made me feel connected to the world in a way I hadn't felt since before everything fell apart. I hadn't seen Meg since the day she came by the house, and that was fine by me. I didn't need to confront her anymore. We were done, and there was nothing left to say. The divorce papers had been filed, and the process was already in motion. It was just a matter of time now before that chapter of my life was officially closed. One afternoon, I was at the community center, going over plans for an upcoming drive, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. "Eric?" a familiar voice said on the other end. It was Tom. My first instinct was to hang up. I didn't want to hear from him, didn't want anything to do with him. But something in his voice stopped me. There was no arrogance, no swagger. Just exhaustion. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice cold. I just wanted to talk," he said, his voice low, almost broken. "I know I have no right to ask, but can we meet?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, filled with the memories of what had happened. The betrayal, the anger. But underneath it all, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sure what I felt, but it wasn't rage. Not anymore. "Fine," I said, after a long pause. "But this is the last time we're having any kind of conversation." We agreed to meet at a cafe downtown. When I walked in, I saw him sitting at a table in the corner, looking like a shadow of the man I used to know. His shoulders were slumped, his face drawn. He looked up as I approached, a mix of guilt and relief in his eyes. "I didn't think you'd come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Neither did I replied, sitting down across from him. For a moment, we just sat there in silence, the tension between us thick and heavy. Finally, Tom spoke. "I don't know how to apologize for what I did," he said, his hands trembling as he fiddled with the edge of his cup. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something that could even come close to making up for it, but there's nothing." "You're right," I said bluntly. "There's nothing you can say." He nodded, his eyes cast down. "I know. I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Truly. I messed up everything, your life, Meg's life, my own life. And now, I'm just trying to figure out how to live with myself." I didn't know what to say. There was no part of me that wanted to comfort him, to tell him it was okay. It wasn't. But as I looked at him, I realized I didn't hate him anymore. He was broken, just like I had been. And in that brokenness, I saw something familiar. "You've got a long road ahead of you," I said, my voice softer than I expected. "And I can't help you with that. But if you're really sorry, then you need to start making things right. Not with me, with yourself." Tom looked up, his eyes filled with something like gratitude. "I'll try," he whispered. I stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "Take care of yourself, Tom." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt lighter. The past wasn't something I could change. But I had faced it. I had confronted it head on, and I had come out on the other side. The anger, the pain, it wasn't gone, but it wasn't in control anymore. I was. And for the first time, I realized that maybe, just maybe, I was going to be okay. The encounter with Tom left me with a strange sense of closure. I hadn't forgiven him, but I no longer carried the weight of the anger I had felt for so long. After leaving the cafe, I walked around the city for hours, thinking about everything that had happened, the affair, the concert, the fallout. It all seemed like a distant chapter in someone else's life, even though I had lived it. Work at the community center kept me busy, and soon enough, it became more than just an escape. It felt like a calling. The fundraiser had been a success, but now I wanted to do more. Marie had noticed my growing involvement and asked me to take on a bigger role, helping manage the programs and coordinate volunteers. I agreed, realizing that this was exactly what I needed. One afternoon, a few weeks after my meeting with Tom, Marie called me into her office. "Eric," she began, smiling as I sat down. "We've been talking, and we want to offer you a permanent position here. Full-time." I blinked, surprised by the offer. For months, I had been volunteering, throwing myself into the work without any thought of where it was leading. Now, faced with the idea of making this my career, I felt a mixture of excitement and hesitation. "Are you sure?" I asked, still processing. "I mean, I've been doing this just to keep myself busy." Marie laughed softly, shaking her head. "You've been doing more than that. The way you've handled the events, the volunteers, it's not just about staying busy anymore, Eric. You've found something you're passionate about. We've all seen it." I sat there for a moment, thinking about her words. She was right. I hadn't realized it, but the work at the center had become more than a distraction. It had given me a sense of purpose, something I hadn't felt in a long time. "I'll do it," I said, finally letting the decision sink in. Marie's smile widened. "I'm glad to hear that. I think this will be good for you." As I left her office, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: hope. The pieces of my life were slowly coming together, not in the way I had expected, but in a way that felt right. I was no longer the man consumed by revenge, by bitterness. I was starting to become someone new, someone stronger. That night, I sat on the back porch of my house, looking out at the quiet street. The silence wasn't as suffocating as it used to be. It felt peaceful. I thought about the future for the first time in a long time. It didn't scare me anymore. I didn't know what it would hold, but I was ready to face it. Months passed, and the rhythm of life continued to shift. I had fully settled into my new role at the community center, and each day brought new challenges and rewards. I spent my time organizing programs, leading volunteer teams, and working on outreach projects. The work filled my days, but it did more than that. It filled the empty spaces inside me, the ones that had been hollowed out by betrayal. One morning, while reviewing a new initiative for helping at-risk teens, I received an unexpected email. It was from Meg. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, unsure of what to expect. The message was short, just a few lines. "Eric, I've been thinking about everything that's happened, and I know we never really had a proper goodbye. I don't know if you'll want to, but I'd like to meet. Just one last time. Meg." I stared at the screen, rereading the words. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let the past stay in the past. I had moved on, or at least I was trying to. But another part of me knew that there were still things left unsaid, things that needed to be resolved before I could truly close that chapter of my life. After a long pause, I typed out a reply. "Okay, let's meet." We arranged to meet at a park near our old neighborhood, a place we used to go when things were good between us. As I approached the spot, I saw her sitting on a bench, staring out at the lake. She looked different, older, somehow. We both did. "Hey," I said as I walked up, my voice neutral. She turned, her face softening as she saw me. "Hey." I sat down next to her, the silence between us thick but not unbearable. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Meg broke the silence. "I didn't think you'd come," she said quietly. "I didn't think I would either," I admitted, looking out at the water. "But I guess there are still things we need to say." She nodded, her eyes clouded with guilt. "I don't know where to start, Eric. I'm sorry doesn't even begin to cover it." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "I know you're sorry, Meg. But what happened, it's done. We can't go back." "I know," she whispered. "I've lost you, and I know that's my fault. I ruined everything we had." There was a sadness in her voice, but it wasn't the desperate plea for forgiveness I had once expected. It was acceptance. She knew, just like I did, that there was no fixing what had been broken. "We both lost something," I said after a pause. "But we're different people now. I'm not the man I was before the affair, and I don't think I ever will be again." Meg looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I never wanted it to end like this." "Neither did I agreed. "But we don't always get to choose how things end." For a while, we sat there, the sound of the wind rustling through the trees filling the space between us. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, but one that felt final, like we both understood that this was the last time we'd ever sit together like this. "I'm leaving town," Meg said suddenly, breaking the quiet. "I need a fresh start. Away from everything that happened." I nodded, not surprised. "That's probably for the best." She glanced at me, her eyes searching mine for something. "Do you think you'll ever forgive me?" I considered her question, letting the weight of it settle. "I don't know. I don't think about it much anymore. Maybe one day, but I've moved on." A small, sad smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "I'm glad. You deserve to be happy." "I hope you find happiness too," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. Meg stood up, brushing off her jeans. "Goodbye, Eric." "Goodbye, Meg," I replied, watching as she walked away, her figure disappearing into the distance. As I sat there on the bench, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. This was it, the real end. There were no more loose ends, no more unresolved feelings. The chapter with Meg was closed, and for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to move forward. I stood up, taking one last look at the lake before turning to leave. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the park. As I walked away, I felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I was free. And I was ready for whatever came next. The next few weeks felt like a blur. After meeting Meg for the last time, I threw myself back into work, but this time it felt different. The weight I had carried for so long was finally gone, and in its place was a lightness I hadn't known in years. It wasn't happiness, exactly, but it was close enough. The community center had become my second home. Marie and I worked together almost daily, organizing new projects, expanding our outreach, and planning future events. The work was rewarding, but what surprised me most was how much I enjoyed the simple things: conversations with volunteers, seeing people come together for a common cause, and even the chaotic, last-minute details before an event. It was on one of these ordinary mornings, during a routine meeting about an upcoming food drive, that Marie brought up something unexpected. "Eric," she said, her tone casual but her eyes sharp, "I've been thinking about your future here." I glanced up from my notes, curious. "What do you mean?" Marie leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. "You've done incredible work since you started here, but I think you're capable of even more. The board agrees. We want you to take over as head of the center." For a moment, I just stared at her, not sure I had heard correctly. "Wait, what?" Marie smiled, clearly amused by my reaction. "I'm serious. I'm stepping down in a few months, and we need someone to take my place. You've shown real leadership here, and we think you're the right person for the job." I blinked, trying to wrap my head around what she was saying. "Me? Running the center? I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," I admitted, feeling a pang of doubt. Marie raised an eyebrow. "Eric, you've been running things for months already. You've got the skills, the passion, and, most importantly, the heart for this work. You've helped rebuild this place from the ground up. This is your next step." I didn't know what to say. The idea of taking on that kind of responsibility was daunting. But at the same time, it felt right. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just reacting to life, I was shaping it, choosing my path. "I'll need to think about it," I said finally, though I already knew my answer. Marie nodded, her expression understanding. "Take your time, but just know, we believe in you. You're ready." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing, not with fear or uncertainty, but with excitement. I hadn't felt this way in years, this sense of anticipation. Of potential. The community center had started as an escape, a way to keep myself from drowning in the aftermath of Meg and Tom's betrayal. But now, it was more than that. It was my future. I thought about everything that had happened in the last year. The affair, the concert, the divorce. It had all been a storm that threatened to destroy me. But here I was, on the other side of it, not just surviving but thriving. I had built something new, something strong. And for the first time in a long time, I was proud of who I had become. The next day, I walked into the center with a sense of purpose. I had made my decision. After the morning meeting, I pulled Marie aside. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll take over as head of the center." Marie smiled, a look of satisfaction crossing her face. "I knew you would." The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Taking on the role of running the community center was more challenging than I had imagined, but it was also the most fulfilling work I had ever done. Every day brought new obstacles, but also new victories. The center grew under my leadership, and I found myself more invested in the work than I ever thought possible. One afternoon, after a particularly successful event, I stood in the middle of the main hall, watching as the last few volunteers packed up. The room was filled with the hum of conversation, the clatter of chairs being stacked, and the sound of laughter. It was a small moment, but it felt significant. Marie approached me, a knowing smile on her face. "How does it feel?" she asked, her voice soft but teasing. I looked around the room, at the people who had become my community, my family, in so many ways. "It feels right," I admitted, feeling the truth of the words. Marie nodded. "You've come a long way, Eric. This place is lucky to have you." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through me. "I'm lucky to have it." As the evening drew to a close and the volunteers trickled out, I stayed behind, lingering in the quiet of the empty center. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about the past. I wasn't haunted by memories of Meg or Tom, or the life I thought I'd have. Instead, I was thinking about the future, about the work still to be done, the lives we could change, and the community we were building. The storm had passed, and I was still standing, stronger than before, ready for whatever came next. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Free from the past, free from the pain, and free to embrace the future with open arms. As the months went by, life settled into a new rhythm. The community center had grown under my leadership, and I felt more fulfilled than ever. I was no longer just reacting to life, I was shaping it. Each day brought new challenges and rewards, and I found myself thriving in a way I never had before. It felt like a rebirth, like I had finally moved on from the pain and betrayal that had once defined me. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. One afternoon, while I was heading out to grab coffee, I ran into someone I hadn't seen in years, Amy. Amy and I had known each other in college. We weren't romantically involved back then, but there had always been an easy connection between us, a natural chemistry that made talking to her feel effortless. We lost touch after graduation, and I haven't thought much about her since. Until now. She was standing in line at the coffee shop, her hair pulled back in a loose bun, her eyes scanning the menu. When she looked up and saw me, her face lit up with recognition. "Eric, is that you?" I smiled, surprised but genuinely happy to see her. "Amy, wow, it's been forever." She stepped out of line to give me a hug, and just like that, it felt like no time had passed. We spent the next few minutes catching up, talking about old friends, careers, and life in general. Amy had been living in the city for a few years now, working as a graphic designer, and she seemed to be doing well. After a while, she glanced at her watch and gave me a sheepish smile. "I'm actually meeting a client soon. But it was so good running into you." "Yeah, it was. We should catch up more properly sometime," I said, feeling a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Amy nodded, already pulling out her phone. "Definitely. Let's grab dinner next week?" I agreed, and we exchanged numbers before going our separate ways. As I walked back to the community center, I couldn't stop thinking about how easy it had been to talk to her, and how natural it felt. It was a small moment, but it made me realize something important. For the first time since Meg, I was open to the idea of moving on, not just in work, but in life. The following week, I found myself sitting across from Amy at a cozy little Italian restaurant downtown. We had met up for dinner, as planned, and the conversation flowed easily, just like it had back in college. We talked about our careers, shared stories about mutual friends, and reminisced about our university days. But as the night went on, the conversation shifted to more personal topics. "So, what happened with you?" Amy asked gently after the waiter refilled our wine glasses. "You mentioned you've been through some stuff, but you didn't really get into it." I hesitated for a moment, not sure how much I wanted to share. But then I realized that I didn't feel the same weight of shame or anger that I once had when talking about Meg and Tom. It was part of my past, sure, but it didn't define me anymore. "Yeah," I said, taking a sip of wine. "I went through a divorce about a year ago. It was messy. My wife had an affair." Amy's eyes softened with sympathy. "I'm so sorry, Eric. That must have been really hard." I nodded. "It was. I won't lie, it broke me for a while. But I got through it. The community center really helped with that. I threw myself into the work, and it gave me a sense of purpose again." Amy smiled, her admiration clear. "That's incredible. Not everyone would come out of something like that stronger. You've built something amazing. Her words touched me, and for a moment, I felt a surge of pride. It wasn't often that I stopped to think about how far I had come, but sitting there with Amy, I realized just how much I had rebuilt my life. What about you? I asked, turning the conversation back to her. You seem to be doing well. Any big life changes? Amy laughed softly, swirling her wine. Not as dramatic as yours. I've been single for a while, just focusing on my career. I had a serious relationship a couple of years ago, but it didn't work out. I guess I've been hesitant to get involved with anyone since then. There was a moment of shared understanding between us. We were both people who had been hurt, and who had retreated into our work as a way to heal. But now, sitting across from each other, I could feel the possibility of something more. By the time we left the restaurant, it was clear that the connection between us wasn't just nostalgia. There was something real here, something worth exploring. As we walked down the street, the cool night air brushing against our skin, Amy turned to me with a smile. This was really nice, Eric. I'm glad we did this. Yeah, me too, I said, meaning every word. We stopped at the corner where our paths diverged, and there was a moment of hesitation, an unspoken question hanging between us. Finally, Amy broke the silence. Maybe we could do this again sometime? I smiled, feeling a sense of excitement that I hadn't felt in a long time. I'd like that. We said our goodbyes, and as I watched her walk away, I couldn't help but feel that something had shifted. For so long, I had been defined by the pain of my past. But now, for the first time, I was looking forward, to new possibilities, to new connections, to a future that wasn't weighed down by what had come before. I walked home with a lightness in my step. My thoughts filled with the memory of Amy's laughter, and the warmth of her smile. Life had taken me on a path I hadn't expected, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would lead next. Maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new. Something good. The next few weeks passed in a blur, and my life began to take on a new sense of balance. I still dedicated most of my time to the community center, but my evenings were often spent with Amy. We went out for dinners, walked around the city, and even spent lazy afternoons talking in a quiet park near her apartment. The connection between us deepened, but I still found myself holding back, hesitating to fully let her in. It wasn't that I didn't trust her, it was that a part of me still carried the scars of what Meg had done. As much as I wanted to move forward, there was a lingering fear that if I opened myself up too much, I'd end up hurt again. One evening, after a late night stroll through the city, Amy and I found ourselves at a small bar near her apartment. It was quiet, almost empty, with the faint sound of jazz playing in the background. We sat in a booth near the window, our drinks in hand, watching the city lights flicker outside. Amy glanced over at me, her expression thoughtful. You've been kind of quiet tonight. Everything okay? I looked up, meeting her gaze. I hadn't realized how lost in thought I had been. Yeah, I'm fine. Just thinking. About? She asked gently, leaning in a little closer. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to put my feelings into words. But then I realized that if I was ever going to move forward, if I was going to let Amy be a part of my life, I needed to be honest with her, and with myself. I've been thinking a lot about the past, I admitted, my voice low. About what happened with Meg, and how it affected me. I guess I didn't realize until recently how much of that I've been carrying around. Amy nodded, her expression sympathetic but patient. She didn't push, didn't try to fill the silence. She just waited, giving me the space to continue. I think a part of me is still afraid, I said, finally voicing the thoughts that had been swirling in my head for weeks. Afraid of letting someone in again. Of trusting someone the way I trusted her. Amy's gaze softened, and she reached out to place her hand on mine. I get that, Eric. I really do. But you're not the same person you were back then. And neither am I. Her words were simple. But they hit me in a way I hadn't expected. She was right. I wasn't the same person I had been when Meg betrayed me. I had changed, grown, and become stronger. And so had Amy. We weren't our pasts. We were two people, here and now, trying to build something new. I know, I said quietly. And I want to move forward. With you. A smile spread across her face, warm and genuine. I want that too. We sat there for a while, our hands intertwined, the weight of the conversation settling into a comfortable silence. For the first time, I felt like I was really letting go of the anger, the pain, the fear. It was still there, in the background, but it no longer defined me. As the night wore on and the bar began to empty out, we decided to head back to Amy's place. The walk was short, and when we got there, she invited me up to her apartment for a drink. We sat on her couch, talking about nothing and everything, the conversation easy and light again. It felt good, right? At some point, as the evening grew late, Amy leaned her head against my shoulder, her voice soft and sleepy. "You know, I'm really glad we found each other again." "Me too," I murmured, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was on the right path, not just in my work, but in my personal life too. It wasn't perfect, and I knew there would still be challenges ahead. But sitting there with Amy, I realized that I wasn't afraid of those challenges anymore. I was ready to face them, to face the future, with her by my side. And maybe, just maybe, I was finally ready to love again. The thought lingered in my mind as I drifted off to sleep that night, Amy curled up beside me, the sound of the city quiet in the distance. Life had thrown a lot at me, but I had survived. And now, for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly living. This was the beginning of something new, something good, and I was ready to embrace it. A few months passed, and my relationship with Amy continued to grow. Things were good, better than I'd ever expected after everything that had happened. But, as life often goes, just when you think you're moving past the old wounds, something comes along to test how far you've really come. It started one afternoon at the community center. I was in the middle of a meeting when I noticed a few missed calls from an unknown number on my phone. I ignored it at first, but after the fourth call, I decided to step out and answer. "Hello?" I said, a little wary. "Eric, it's Meg." The voice hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't spoken to Meg in over a year, not since we finalized the divorce. I thought I had closed that chapter of my life, but hearing her voice brought everything rushing back, the betrayal, the anger, the hurt. I paused, struggling to keep my voice calm. "What do you want?" There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer and more vulnerable than I remembered. I just wanted to talk. There's something I need to tell you." I clenched my jaw, torn between the urge to hang up and the strange curiosity that tugged at me. "Meg, we don't need to talk. We've both moved on." "I know," she said quickly. "But this is important. Please, Eric, just give me a few minutes." I sighed, glancing at my watch. "Fine, you've got 5 minutes." Meg took a deep breath before she started talking. "I wanted to apologize. For everything. What I did to you, it was unforgivable. I was selfish and thoughtless. And I hurt you in ways I can never take back. I've been carrying that guilt with me, and I needed to tell you. I'm sorry." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to yell at her, to tell her that no apology could fix what she had done. But another part of me, a part one hadn't fully acknowledged until now, felt a strange sense of closure. "I appreciate the apology, Meg," I said finally, my voice steady but distant. "But we've both moved on. I'm in a different place now." She hesitated before speaking again. "I know. I heard you're seeing someone." I stiffened. "How do you know that?" "Tom told me," she admitted. "He's still playing shows around town, and I guess he heard about you and Amy." Of course. Tom. It was almost laughable how his name could still come up and twist the knife, even after all this time. "Eric, I'm not trying to stir up old wounds," Meg said quickly, sensing my silence. I wanted to let you know that I'm happy for you. You deserve to be happy." The words sounded sincere, but they didn't sit well with me. I didn't need her validation or her blessing. "I am happy, Meg. And I don't need anything from you. Not anymore." She was quiet for a long moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "I understand. I won't bother you again." With that, the call ended, leaving me standing in the hallway of the community center, staring down at my phone. I felt unsettled, like the ground had shifted beneath me. Meg's apology didn't change anything, but hearing her voice, knowing that she still had some kind of window into my life, it bothered me more than I wanted to admit. Later that evening, I met Amy for dinner. We had plans to go to our favorite Italian spot, but as we sat across from each other at the table, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease from the call with Meg. "You okay?" Amy asked, noticing my distraction. I hesitated for a moment before telling her the truth. "I heard from Meg today." Amy's expression didn't change, but I could see the flicker of something in her eyes. "What did she want?" "She apologized. For everything," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. Said she felt guilty and wanted to make things right. Amy nodded slowly. And how do you feel about that? I took a deep breath, realizing how much I valued Amy's presence and her stability. I don't know. I don't care about her apology, not really. But hearing from her again, it brought up a lot of stuff I thought I'd buried. Amy reached across the table, her hand resting on mine. That's understandable, Eric. But remember, you've moved past that. You've built a new life. Meg doesn't have any power over you anymore. I looked into her eyes and felt a sense of calm wash over me. Amy was right. Meg didn't have any power over me. This was just a reminder of where I had been, not where I was going. I know, I said softly, squeezing her hand. I'm done with that part of my life. And as I said the words, I realized they were true. Meg's apology didn't change anything. My future wasn't with her. It was with Amy, with the community center, with the life I was building. That night, as we left the restaurant and walked hand in hand through the city streets, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in a long time. Meg was the past. Amy was my future. And I was finally ready to embrace it fully. With the weight of Meg's unexpected apology behind me, I felt more free than ever. Life was moving forward, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. The community center was thriving, and things with Amy were getting serious. But as with all good things, there came a moment when we had to take the next step. One evening, as Amy and I were cooking dinner at my place, the conversation took a natural turn toward the future. So, she began, chopping vegetables at the counter while I stirred the sauce on the stove. What do you think about us living together? I paused, surprised but not entirely caught off guard. We had been spending most nights together anyway, alternating between her apartment and mine, and it felt like the next logical step. Still, it was a big decision. I've thought about it, I admitted, turning the heat down on the stove. And I think it could be a good idea. What about you? Amy smiled, setting down the knife and turning to face me. I think we're ready. I mean, we practically live together already, right? It just makes sense. She was right. We had become each other's constants. And the thought of waking up to her every day, of building a home together, it excited me. I hadn't felt this way since before everything with Meg, and it felt good. It felt right. Let's do it, I said, smiling back at her. Let's move in together. Amy's face lit up, and she crossed the room to kiss me. I'm really happy, Eric, she whispered against my lips. This feels right. It does, I agreed, wrapping my arms around her. As we stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, I realized how far I had come. A year ago, I was broken, lost in the wreckage of my past. But now, I was building something new, something real, with Amy. We spent the rest of the evening talking about logistics, about merging our lives together in a more concrete way. It wasn't just about moving in, it was about building a future, one that we both wanted and were excited about. The next few weeks were filled with packing, moving boxes, and the chaos of combining two homes into one. But through it all, there was a sense of excitement, of possibility. This wasn't just a new chapter, it was a new beginning. As I unpacked the last of my things into our shared space, I realized that for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Amy and I were building something beautiful, and I was ready for whatever came next. The first morning in our shared apartment was calm. Sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a soft glow on the wooden floors. The boxes were mostly unpacked, with only a few scattered reminders of the chaotic moves still lingering around the space. Amy and I had settled in easily, falling into a routine that felt as natural as breathing. As I stood in the kitchen, brewing coffee, I couldn't help but reflect on how far things had come. A year ago, I was a mess, barely holding myself together after the divorce, consumed by anger and hurt. And now, here I was, making breakfast for the woman who had helped me rediscover what it meant to trust, to love, to look forward instead of backward. Amy walked into the kitchen, still groggy, her hair tousled from sleep. She smiled when she saw me, patting over to wrap her arms around my waist as I poured her a cup of coffee. Morning, she murmured, pressing her face into my chest. Morning, I replied, placing a soft kiss on her forehead. We stood like that for a moment, neither of us in a rush to move. It felt good, this quiet routine we had started to build. There was no tension, no lingering fear of what might go wrong. Just the simplicity of being together. After a while, Amy looked up at me, her eyes still sleepy but bright with warmth. You know, I've been thinking about something. Yeah? What's that? I think we should do something to celebrate this new chapter. Not just moving in together, but everything we've built. I feel like we've both come a long way. I smiled at her suggestion. Amy had always been good at marking moments, at finding ways to appreciate where we were and where we were going. What did you have in mind? She grinned, her excitement starting to bubble over. How about a trip? Just the two of us. Somewhere we've never been, where we can really take a break and enjoy each other. The idea immediately sparked something in me. It felt right, a chance to not only celebrate what we had but to fully embrace this new phase of life. I hadn't taken a real break in what felt like forever, and the thought of getting away with Amy, of leaving behind the everyday responsibilities, was more appealing than I expected. That sounds perfect, I said, nodding. Where do you want to go? Amy bit her lip, thinking for a moment before her eyes lit up. What about Hawaii? We could relax on the beach, hike some trails, and maybe even try surfing. A little adventure and a lot of relaxation. I chuckled. Hawaii, huh? I'm definitely in. We spent the rest of the morning looking up flights and hotels, getting more and more excited as the plan started to come together. It wasn't just a trip, it was a celebration of everything we had overcome. It was a reminder that life could be good again, that happiness wasn't some distant, unattainable thing. Over the next few days, we finalized our plans, and before I knew it, we were on a plane, flying over the Pacific Ocean, heading toward a new adventure. The flight gave me plenty of time to reflect. Amy had been right, we needed this. Not just a break, but a way to solidify the new foundation we had built. When we landed in Honolulu, the warm air hit us as soon as we stepped off the plane. The sound of the ocean in the distance, the palm trees swaying in the breeze, it all felt like a dream. As we made our way to the hotel, I glanced over at Amy, who was staring out the window, a soft smile on her face. She caught me looking and squeezed my hand. This is going to be good for us, she said softly. I know, I replied. And I meant it. The next few days were a blur of beach days, hikes through lush green trails, and quiet evenings watching the sunset. We laughed more than I could remember in years, and with every passing moment, I felt myself letting go of the last remnants of the past. Being with Amy, in this place, was like hitting a reset button on my life. One evening, as we walked along the beach, the sun dipping below the horizon, Amy stopped and turned to face me. Her expression was serious but soft, her eyes reflecting the last light of the day. I love you, Eric, she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. I don't think I've ever said it like that, but I do. I love you. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The words hung in the air between us, and I felt my heart swell in a way I hadn't expected. I had known, of course. I had felt it in everything she did, in the way she looked at me, in the way she had been there for me when I needed it most. But hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way nothing else could. I love you too, Amy, I said, my voice thick with emotion. More than I ever thought I could again. We stood there for a long time, holding each other as the waves lapped at our feet, the world around us quiet and still. At that moment, I knew that this was it. This was the life I wanted. A life where love wasn't a source of pain or betrayal, but a source of strength, of healing, of hope. As we made our way back to the hotel, hand in hand, I realized that for the first time in years, I was truly happy. The scars of the past were still there, but they didn't define me anymore. I had moved on. I had found love again. And this time, I wasn't afraid. Hawaii wasn't just a vacation, it was the beginning of something new. A life built on trust, on love, on the promise of a future that didn't carry the weight of the past. And as Amy and I sat on the balcony that night, watching the stars twinkle above us, I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together.